afternoon, good evening, dear partner, Nacelle partner. Thank you again for being here with us. We're so excited. It's already April. Summer is almost here. And I am so sorry for the technical difficulty that we just had. And then we just started a couple minutes late. But thank you for your patience. Once again, welcome to the Partner Office Hour. My name is Unita Hollinger. I am your Partner Alliances Manager. With me, I have Jacob Tuman, which is my Partner Account Manager. We are your main contact here at Nacelle. Any questions, any, like resources, or just like you want to know more about what we do in the space, or any complaint, hopefully not, but we always open. Okay, so welcome. So the Partner Office Hour is a session when we'll be giving you anything like updates about what we do, about what's happening, and also we try to be very resourceful, right? Sharing all the information about what we do. So we're going to have a tech talk where one of our experts will be talking about something that they're very familiar about, passionate, and where they know they've done a lot of this. So they don't only talk the talk, they also walk the walk, right? For this session, we have our own Allegra Anka, our solution architect. She'll be speaking about Google Analytics in a headless SPA environment. And then we have at the end a quick Q&A. So post your questions, right? Post your question on the Slack channel, Partner Slack channel. Okay, so updates. Shout out to our partner, Just Uno, who just releasing their Shopify masterclass, right? So what they're doing is they curating all this information about how can you be successful in building your brand at Shopify. So every week for the next 10 weeks, there will be different expert going to tell you about what they know and gonna give you all the tips and information, right? So just register, Google it, Shopify Masterclass Just Uno, and you'll have this sent to your inbox on a weekly basis. Don't miss Nacelle. We have our very own Ron Pereira, who will be discussing the what, why, and how of using a headless commerce solutions. Don't miss that. And then we also have new content. So a lot of things we need to learn about headless, right? So a lot of information. So that's important for us to provide the newest, the latest, and the easiest information to be digest for our partner, for our customer. When you have your customer asking you, so you can tell me, hey, I remember I spoke with Unito, I saw in Partner Office Hour. Let me send them this information. So the new content that we have is a 5 reason for headless commerce on the modern commerce stack, right? So not only they will give you those 5 reasons like speed, customization, reduce cost. It will tell you all the reason why. But we also have case study materials. There's 5 different case study with different clients. For example, Ilia Beauty, they were able to increase their developer deployment by 20% by going headless, by implementing modern commerce stack. And also 48% decrease in mobile load time. And also another example, Enso Ring, they were able to decrease build time by 5 times on a modern commerce stack solution. And you're probably asking, so what is modern commerce stack? Well, have a look and you will have explanation all over there in this new blog. Very interesting. So without further ado, let me present you to Allegra Anka. Hi, Allegra.
Hi, Unita.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Very exciting. And this is Allegra first time doing this, so no pressure. But not the first time that she's doing all this Google Analytics in the headless SPA environment. So we have a lot of customers, right? A lot of customers, when they go from like the monolithic solution to the headless, they think the Google Analytics will just function normally the same they were gonna function, but there's actually a lot of changes. And so Allegra been helping them and holding them and helping them like find solution. So she's going to talk about all this finding, what she knows, and give you some tips. Okay, Allegra, I am going to add your screen and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anita, for that introduction. And you can see my screen okay?
I think there's kind of a blur over there. I only saw like a quarter of it. So make it maybe a bit bigger. So
I was trying to do the slideshow. Oh no, that's weird.
Yeah, it doesn't say.
Let's see.
You can pull it to see more, like because I only see like it's only feel like a quarter of the screen.
Yeah, how's man, technology today is not my friend.
Well, you know, there's some of those days that's not your day, but don't worry, let's do plan B. What if I just share my screen again and then you just tell me when would you like me to move to the next slide? Sounds good?
That's a great solution.
Excellent. Let's do that. Let's away, Allegra.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. And thanks for bearing with us as we move through our technical difficulties. So thank you so much, Anita, for that introduction. Again, I'm Allegra. I'm a solutions architect on the Cells customer experience team. And like Anita said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the discovery and the work that we've been doing around analytics, specifically as it relates to transitioning from a monolithic headed site to a headless stack. And you can go ahead and switch, Anita. So generally, oh, sorry, you can go back one to the background and rationale. That's perfect. Yep. So generally speaking, our merchants sometimes come to us for assistance with analytics questions. So it's been an area of interest that we want to learn more about and provide value around. And more specifically, we started to notice that our merchants would come to us with complaints about their analytics looking off in various ways after launching Headless with Nacelle. So we've come to understand this as a significant pain point for our merchants who rely obviously on analytics data for all areas of their business, and one that we would need to get a better understanding of and get ahead of during Headless implementation. So we want to eliminate this pain point of, we help you, Nacelle is a platform, helps you go headless faster and easier and more efficiently and all of the things. But if your analytics are, messed up after you launch, that's obviously a big problem. And so we see this as part of our responsibility to our merchants and to our agency partners to proactively deal with this as best we can during implementation before launch. So we've been learning that there are some adaptations that need to be made during, to the traditional implementation during transition to headless. And we've been focusing on a few key ones, which we'll talk more about throughout this presentation. Analytics is hugely flexible and configurable, regardless of whether it's Google Analytics or another platform that is being used. And there are many, many, many infinite problems that can come up, during implementation, afterwards, data looking off and things like that. We can't possibly understand all of those things ahead of time. So what we focus on is, at least in this phase right now, are those issues that specifically pertain to headless, right? Things that will be affected in the move from headed to headless, like tracking page views correctly on a single page application, cross-domain tracking, and potentially tracking specific events on the front end that may have been handled automatically by Shopify before. So the main thing has been to gain an understanding of the overarching issues and position ourselves to be able to help. So you can go ahead and switch, Anita, to traditional headed approach. Awesome. So the first thing that we needed to understand was, what exactly is the problem, right? What's lacking in the traditional approach? What are the types of problems that occur? What do they look like in the data? And most importantly, how do we set ourselves up? How do we set our merchants up? And how do we set our partner agencies up for success with this information? So the first thing is that the way that The first thing is really the way that the Google Analytics tracking code snippet was designed to work. It's designed to work on traditional websites that have more than one HTML page, right? So with those, each new page is requested from the server. There's a round trip to and from the server. It's returned to the browser where the page is loaded and parsed normally. The Google Analytics tracker is therefore executed in the script on the page as it's loaded each time, and it passes the new page data with it seamlessly to Google. This doesn't work on an SPA, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Going headless also means using distributed services, which means cross-domain tracking becomes relevant in most cases. This has been a big issue that we find is often overlooked in the switch from headed to headless. So we'll also definitely be talking more about this as well. And lastly, Shopify provides a really relatively easy way to take advantage of analytics features and to configure all of that in the dashboard. Things like enhanced e-commerce, tracking specific events from the front end. These will need to be considered as part of the implementation because they won't necessarily be provided for free anymore on the new front end application. And you can switch, Unita. Thank you. So these are the main adaptations that, again, we've been looking at so far. So we're focusing on a few key ones. So for single page applications, we just talked about how the tracking script is designed to work on traditional sites. So on single page applications where there's just usually one tiny HTML page and a whole bunch of JavaScript that typically runs client side, this doesn't work anymore. And it doesn't work anymore because JavaScript and Ajax loads new content to the site without a page refresh at all. And it changes the URL using the history API or some abstraction of the history API. So the Google Analytics implementation needs to account for this to properly capture that data that it's not getting automatically from a new page load. One solution to this is to hook the tracking code into the app's routing system. So many of the front-end frameworks that we work with, Next, Nuxt, Gatsby, have client-side routing systems. And one solution is to hook the tracking code into that system so that we can capture virtual page views when they're fired with the router. So that when a new page content and a new URL are updated, the correct data goes with it. And this means basically that the path should match, the title should match, the state of the application in terms of the data on the page should match with all of those things. And so that's one of the things that we've started testing and thoroughly looking at to make sure that this is happening on each navigation. And I'm going to do a quick demo of this at the end. Cross-domain tracking, we're going to talk a lot more about this in an upcoming slide, so I'll hold off on it for now, but this has been a really big issue. It's one that we've seen across a few merchants now at this point. And lastly, losing Shopify functionality. The other thing to really keep in mind, and we haven't seen too much of this as a problem yet with respect to applications and functionalities on Shopify, but it's definitely something to assess and to start thinking about during implementation, whether or not there's apps or functionalities that are being used now that you're going to lose once you move off of Shopify for the main site. And that may or may not need to be integrated directly into the front end application if they have an API, or maybe there is a substitute. But it's definitely something to think about, the current stack and how it will change once you go headless. All right, I'm ready for the next slide. So initially, our response to analytics issues was more reactive. A merchant would raise questions or concerns, and we would look into it. This is how we started to figure out that cross-domain tracking was often overlooked, and that attribution issues can sometimes be caused by inaccurate capturing of page views and some of the issues that we just went over. And more importantly, that these simple things can compound and really skew the rest of the data. So it becomes a really big problem, even if seemingly simple things are off. So we've created a task list in our standard code audit that looks for these issues, which we'll look more at in a minute as well. And ideally, moving forward in all new implementations, this is what, here on this slide, this is what our process would look like ideally. This is the goal. So, and this would ideally be in collaboration with our partner agencies. So there would be a period of discovery where we take a baseline of current metrics, so conversion metrics and other important metrics on Shopify as a starting point. Have a very pointed conversation with the merchant about metrics that are most important to them and what they really want to see. What really needs to be captured on the new front end site. And then really the last sort of important piece is setting expectations around this. Because right now we've been doing a lot of research and a lot of work around analytics and how we can make it better and how we can kind of eliminate some of these problems that occur, but we're not necessarily analytics experts yet. However, so there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's issues that may come up that don't necessarily have to do with going headless, but they are analytics issues, or even some that may have to do with headless. We are super focused right now on the issues that have to do with going headless, and the issues that can come up related to the transition from Shopify to a headless site. So definitely just keeping in mind, and it's important to understand that some analytics issues coming up down the road is basically inevitable, and may not have to do with going headless specifically. And while we're always happy to help, those aren't necessarily the focus of what I'm about to show here. And so that's kind of the discovery piece. The implementation, this would be its own workflow alongside the nacelle build and the nacelle implementation, and sort of putting into practice on site all of those things that were previously discussed with the merchant in terms of the metrics that are important to them, in addition to some of these things that need to be covered here, such as tracking route changes, cross-domain tracking, enhanced e-commerce, which would need to be its own implementation for the front end. And then also it's good practice to track specific events manually. So thinking about how all of that fits into the nacelle implementation process. And then lastly, testing. So going through a period of verification and testing and making sure that there's ample time for that during implementation, and an ample effort going into checking that the data is coming through as we expect it to, based on the implementation that we've set up and the configurations in the Google Analytics dashboard that we've set up. So we can go to the next slide. So cross-domain tracking, I'm going to kind of go into this example a little bit deeper and do a demo of how we've been sort of looking at whether it's set up correctly, and how we kind of troubleshoot these things. So the need for cross-domain tracking arises not just for headless, but in any situation when you use services on more than one domain, but you want to capture user flows across those services as a single session. Right? So for our merchants, this happens when they move from Shopify only, for example, to a storefront with its own domain and checkout services on what is technically a different domain, so still on Shopify, right? So normally, Google Analytics collects a client ID for every hit and stores it on the current domain as a cookie, where it can be accessed then by that domain, by the source domain. The way cross-domain tracking works is that Google Analytics has a linking feature that lets the source domain append the client ID to the URL in situations where it links out to a target domain that would need it, right? So in this case, that would be the .myshopify URL at checkout. And then the target domain additionally needs to be configured properly to receive that client ID. So there's 4 main steps which are listed here, which really go into making sure that cross-domain tracking is working properly. And we've seen examples where we've had use cases where a merchant will say, my sessions are inflated, they're looking funny. We have sessions that are dropping off and then sessions starting at checkout. And this inevitably ended up being an issue with cross-domain tracking. But when we raised it as, hey, it could be an issue with your cross-domain tracking, there was some misconception around the fact that it was already set up and it was set up properly. And that's because some of these steps were completed, but some weren't. And so to get it fully working properly, these are like the 4 main steps that really need to be taken in order to do that. And with all the different ways of implementing Google Analytics, there's definitely nuances of how to do that using each different approach. But regardless, all of these things would need to be done. And with that, I'm kind of hoping that I can successfully share my screen again, because I want to show a little bit about the tools that we use to do this and what this looks like on a site. So I am.
Hey, Allegra, I think you should be okay now.
Good?
Yes. Yep. I think
Great.
Everyone can see your screen. Looking well.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, so this is This is an example of a code audit template that we use, and the main objective behind a majority of this is that we go through an implementation and we look for best practices and kind of make recommendations that would improve performance, improve sort of approaches to implementation that would be more efficient for making requests and things like that. And so as a part of this, a part of our standard kind of process for looking through the site, we've added this section for Google Analytics. And one of the things, basically what we do here is, again, we kind of take a look at the way that Google Analytics is, set up on the site already. Just take stock of it. It can be, there's a lot of different ways to do this. It can be done manually. It can be done using modules such as the example here, Nuxt GTM. But regardless of that, we just kind of look at how it's implemented. We go through the documentation for implementing it, and we make sure that everything looks like it's set up right, and just kind of take stock of what's there. And then secondly, tracking code placement. So sometimes this can be handled, again, if it's, if you're using GTM to implement Google Analytics, this isn't necessarily an issue, but if it's being implemented manually, then we want to make sure that the tracking code placement is correct and that it would be running on all pages. And again, kind of linked into that client-side routing. Cross-domain tracking, those 4 steps that we just kind of talked about, making sure that those are set up correctly. And again, the client-side routing changes, there's a couple different ways to approach that as well. There's ways to, again, hook into the routing code. There's also this history change trigger that GTM provides out of the box that you can set up, and that'll keep track of all of the different history changes on the site. So lots of different ways to do this, and that's actually part of the challenge, is that there's no standard, necessarily one correct way. And so what we've been figuring out is, we just kind of have to look at how it's being done, what's the preferred method of implementation for the particular development team and for that merchant, and going, trying to gather as much information and knowledge about how to optimize it given, the implementation that's being used. And so with that, I'll pull up an example of a client site, and I'll just kind of bring you through a really awesome tool that I have been using is called Google Analytics Debugger. It's very easily installable in the Chrome extension store. So that's here. I've kind of pinned it to my bar and I just turn it on. And what this does is it'll refresh the page and it turns on debug mode for Google Analytics. So in the console, it'll dump all of these Google Analytics messages for the page that we're looking at and the site that we're looking at. So in terms of single page application and route tracking, this will actually show you the current path, the title, again, the data we want to make sure lines up and that it's tracking. There's a lot of really useful information in here. We won't be looking at all of it, but again, that it's tracking to the correct tracking ID and property ID for Google Analytics, and that matches, if you're doing cross-domain tracking as well, you want to be tracking all to the same one. But what we kind of look at here is if I navigate through the site, all of this page information should be being sent in accurately, and we'll see that it is on this particular site. So if I navigate over to a different section, and we should actually see it for this section. So we come down here and we see that we're on a collection page. So I'll typically do a test on the home page, on many different pages, product landing pages, collection pages, product detail pages, just to make sure that everything's coming in. And so you can see here, just kind of come up, the title matches, this should show, yep. Again, the path is good, and we know that the correct page information is being sent into Google. If I click on a product, we'll see that the same is true for the product detail page. And here we go. So that's one really kind of simple way to look at how your page views are being managed and tracked. And then in terms of cross-domain tracking, I'm going to go ahead and actually clear this out. And I have a few things in my basket here, but go ahead and review and check this out. So we are still on, the main pavers domain, right? And we've got some errors happening here, but the important thing for cross-domain tracking, again, is this client ID. So the browser, in terms of assigning a session and a client ID, we want to make sure that this client ID remains the same on this pavers.co.uk site all the way across through to Shopify, meaning that I'm being recognized as one user and this is being recognized as one session as we move through checkout, so that their data reflects the correct amount of sessions and that these conversion flows are depicted accurately. So if I go to checkout, and I'll actually clear this so that's easier to see. And you can see that we're now on checkout.pavers, which is actually the My Shopify, and the client ID is the same. So this is all set up and working properly. And in cases where it's not, so if you do this flow and you see that it's different, then those 4 steps that we kind of talked about previously in the previous slide would be the things to sort of go back through and check for your specific type of implementation, how the linking feature needs to be set up so that this is working correctly. So that is basically kind of concludes the presentation portion that I have. Essentially, the last thing I'll kind of say is that we're really, just really excited to be able to be doing this work and to get a better understanding of this, because this is such an important issue and really kind of just like a major pain point that we can really help to eliminate. And is sort of in keeping with our promise to make Headless, an easy and painless process.
Hey, Allegra, thank you. That's very a lot of information, and I hope the viewers has a better understanding about how to use Google Analytics in the Headless environment, right? So let's now answer some questions. We've been compiling some questions from our partners directly on the partner Slack channel, and let's see, what's the first question that we have over here. Okay, so when we say a lot, you were talking about Google Analytics, right? But what if merchants sometimes they want to use something else? So can you speak a bit about your experience about merchants that want to use other analytic platform in place of Google Analytics, and if so, what are those?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of different alternatives. Many, new companies are coming out. Plausible. There's just like a long list of alternative analytics systems, and some of which are becoming more popular. And so that is a really great question, because right now, and I think part of the reason is because Google Analytics is so easily implemented into Shopify that we're seeing Google Analytics most often. However, so a lot of the sort of technical details and the Google specific aspects of this are what we're gaining initial experience with. However, these issues, though, making sure that you're tracking correctly across domains and making sure that you're tracking page views correctly in a single page application, these are all going to be concepts that apply no matter what analytics platform is being used. And, with that, we're definitely looking forward to branching out into some of the more popular platforms and looking at, just kind of getting more familiar with how those are implemented as well. But, again, even with Google Analytics, each implementation is pretty different, or can be, it has the potential to be. So we kind of go into it with, definitely understanding there's going to be some kind of a learning curve. And that would apply as well with any other platform. So regardless of what is being used, these steps and these audits that we do will apply no matter what.
Okay. And also, like you said, there's always going to be learning curve, right? So can you tell us a bit about what's the learning curve with using analytic for PWA specific features?
Sure. So yeah, so PWAs, and just to kind of, as like a refresher of definitions, basically a PWA is just a website that utilizes a set of modern features that are newly available to the web, to make them, to make web experiences look, feel, and act more like a native application experience. And so this includes things like offline experiences, push notifications, being installable to the device. And so, and this is all really awesome because we know how important mobile is, especially for commerce. So being able to create these experiences that look and feel like the apps that people are already used to is really awesome. But obviously that raises the challenge of, understanding how users are interacting with those things. And specifically in the ways that some of these technologies, so service workers, for example, which make offline experiences possible, they're not browser based. They don't just run in the browser. They don't have access to the window. And so thinking about how we deal with analytics for some of these technologies and some of these features are going to look really different, even more different than some of the stuff we've already been talking about. And this is an area, again, that we've, not delved into super deep yet at this point, but is definitely on our radar and something that we're looking to expand upon for sure.
Excellent. That's very good to know. And also, is there, you've done a bit of implementation, right, for our merchants, and obviously before they go headless, they're already using Google Analytics, right? So now when they go headless, from your experience, is there like a preferred method of implementation for analytics? Like, when people want to go, for example, the GTM versus a more manual implementation. And that's first question, okay? Just so is there any preferred method for implementation? And the second question is there, I know you said during the presentation there's no specific solution for any there's no specific like solution for like the best solution is depending on situation, right? But based on your experience, is there one that you think would work the best for the merchant?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I guess I will start answering that by saying that that's a question that we have. So, when we think about the different approaches and, implementing manually versus using something like Nuxt GTM, it's really, again, going to depend on, maybe something that the agency that we're working with has experience with already. Maybe is going to depend on preferences in terms of, really what just kind of like the range of resources amongst business needs for the merchant and development needs for the agency teams. But I think what we're currently working on, though, to your point, is really gaining some use cases around that. So we've seen, I think, so first, to answer your first question, I think what we really need right now is use cases to kind of look at which methods are the most preferred and most popular amongst development teams already, so that we can therefore start to form an opinion based on that.
Okay.
And I think, it's really because we talk a lot about performance as well. So, I think it's really easy. It makes it a lot easier and more efficient to use something like Nuxt GTM because it handles a lot of this stuff out of the box. The cross-domain tracking, the single page applications, just setting it up through this module that is meant to work in these modern front-end frameworks can really help to eliminate a lot of the steps involved, which I do think would be really useful in many cases. However, if we had a situation where the most important thing was optimizing for performance, GTM, because it's known to sort of have the potential to add latency and, it adds JavaScript to the site, for example. In those cases, it might be better to implement manually so that it's a little bit more lean. So it really is going to depend on the situation, but I am hoping that with some more experience around this topic, we are able to come out with some stronger opinions about what makes the most sense in most cases.
Okay.
Yeah, and also to be able to provide the kind of maybe from a more objective point of view, the pros and cons of each case, and then let the sort of
I guess, like, we'll need a lot more like case studies and then compare results, right? Allegra, simple question for someone who's not, don't come from this background. What does GTM stand for?
Oh, it's a Google Tag Manager. Sorry.
Google Chat Manager. Okay. Okay. Just want to clear it out, because people would like me would think it's a go-to-market. So
Okay, yeah, I know it's like
thank you, Allegra.
algorithm soup.
So now, like, I think, let's take last question. Right. So we at Nacelle work a lot with partners, right? Like, partners is I would say the blood of our organization. Like, we need partner to be able to make sure our customer, our merchant go headless seamlessly, right? So how can partners collaborate with Nacelle on merchant analytics challenges?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that's definitely one of the things that we're working on right now as well, is trying to get an understanding of, first and foremost, how are our partners approaching Google Analytics already, right? So they may have processes in place, and so we want to understand those better, and we basically just want to fit in wherever we can to be the most helpful. So, essentially these are things that we can look for on our end as a part of our code audits, but also we would love to be able to collaborate with our agency partners and figure out what works best for each partner, to kind of figure out what are the needs that they have, that where we can provide support and value in terms of Google Analytics, whether that's, working in conjunction with the merchant to kind of figure out some of this stuff, doing audits of the site, helping with testing. It's really, I think it's going to be a little bit case by case, but that's also one of the things that we're working on to kind of figure out, is how we can be a good partner to all of our different agencies, however that might be for each individual one.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I want to say thank you, Allegra, for your time. And you heard it, partners. Any questions? If you want to know more, reach out to me or Jake, and then Allegra over here will be more than happy to have more conversation one-to-one. We're always here to help our partner in that spirit. If you have any topic that you think you might be interested in, or you want to present in our office hour, you can always reach out to us. My email is unita.hollinger@getnacelle.com. Again, thank you everyone for being here with us, and thank you, Allegra, for your time, and have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Thank you so much.